I'm going to start off on chapter 5, part 2. He refused to believe either that the food would become more plentiful or that the windmill would save work. Windmill or no windmill. Hold on a minute, I gotta switch on. Okay, windmill or no windmill, he said. Life would go on as it had always gone on. That is badly, apart from the disputes of the windmill. There was the question of the defense of the farm, and was fully realized that though human beings had been defeated in the battle of the cowshed, they might make another and more attempt to recapture the farm and restake Mr. Jones. All the more reason for doing so, because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on the neighboring farms more restive. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to procure firearms and train themselves in their use. More pigeons and stirred up rebellion among the animals on the other farm. The one argued that if they could not defend themselves, they were bound to be conquered. The other argued that if rebellions happened everywhere, they would have no need to define themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their minds which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with who was speaking at the moment. At least the day came when Snowball's plans were completely at the meeting of the following Sunday. The question of whether or not to begin the work on the windmill was to be put to the vote. When the animals had assembled on the big farm, Snowball stood up and, though occasionally interrupted by beating from the sheep, set forth his reasons for advocating the building of the windmill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was nonsense, and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds, and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect produced at this Snowball sparing to his feet, and shouted down. The sheep, who had been beating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but only a moment Snowball's eloquence carried them away. In glowing sentences, he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sterile labor was lifted from the farm, lifted from the animals. His imagination had now run far beyond chaff cutters and turnip slices. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers, and reapers and blinders, besides supplying every stall with its own electric light, hot and cold water, and an electric heater. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a particular sidelong, looking at Snowball, uttering a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside, and 9 enormous dogs wearing grass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. Then the dogs were gaining on him again. One of them all about closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. But he put on an extra squirt. With a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures came from, but the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies from Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately, though not yet full grown. They were huge dogs and were fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs then used to do to Mr. Jones. Napoleon with the dogs following him, now mounted onto the raised portion of the floor, where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. From now on, the Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said. Give me a minute. On Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In the future, all questions relating to the work of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs presented over by himself. These would meet in private and afterwards communicate their decisions to the others. The animals would still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag, singing Beasts of England, and receive their orders for the week. But there would be no more debates. in spite of their shock at Snowball's explosion, had given them the animals were dismayed. By this account, several of them would have protested if they could have found the right arguments. Even Boxer was vaguely troubled. His back shook his foreleg several times and tried hard to marshal his thoughts. But in the end he could not think of anything to say. Some of the pigs themselves, however, were more accurate for young porkers in the front row, uttered shrill squeaks of disapproval, and all four of them sprang to their feet and began squeaking at once. But suddenly the dog sitting around Napoleon let out a deep menacing growl. The pigs fell silent and sat down again. Then the sheep broke out into a tremendous beating of 4 legs good and 2 legs bad, which went for nearly a quarter of an hour, and put an end to any chance of discussion. Afterwards, Squealer was sent around the farm to explain new arguments to the others. "Comrades," he said, "I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not image, comrades. Leadership is a pleasure on the country. It is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to make your decisions for yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades. Decisions, comrades. Where should you be?" Had decided to follow Snowball and his moonshine and windmills. Snowball, who, as we know, was no better than a criminal. He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed, and somebody bravery is not enough, said Squealer. Loyalty and obedience are more important. And as to the Battle of the Cowshed, I believe the time will come when we shall find that Snowball's part in it was much exaggerated. Discipline, comrades, iron discipline is the watchword for today. One false step, and your enemies would be upon us. Surely, comrades, you do not want Jones back? The argument was unanswered. Certainly, animals did not want Jones back. If holding the debate on Sunday mornings was liable to bring him back, then the debates must stop. Boxer, who now had time to think things over, voiced the general feeling, saying, "If Comrade Napoleon says it must be right." And from then on, he adopted the maximum Napoleon is always right. In addition to his private motto of "I they will work harder. By this time, the weather had broken and spring plowing had begun. The shed where Snowball had drawn his plans of the windmill had been shut up, and it was assumed that the plans had been rubbed off the floor. At 10 o'clock, animals assembled at the big barn, receiving their orders for the week. The skull of Old Major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchard and set up on a stump at the foot of Flagstaff, beside the gun. After the hoisting of the flag, the animals were required past the skull in reverent manner before entering the barn. And nowadays they did not sit all together as they had done in the past. Napoleon was Squeaker, and the other pig named Minimus, who had led remarkable gift for composing songs and poems, sat on the front and raised his platform with the 9 young dogs forming a symmetrical semicircle around them, and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat face them in the main body of the barn. Napoleon read out the orders for the week in a gruff solidarity style, and after a single sing of Beasts of England, all the animals disappeared. On the 3rd Sunday after Snowball's exclusion, the animals were somewhat surprised to hear Napoleon announce that the windmill was to be built after all. He did not give any reason for having changed his mind, but merely warned the animals that this extra task would mean very hard work, might even be necessary to reduce their rations. The plan, however, had been prepared down to the last detail. A special committee of pigs had been at work upon them for the past 3 weeks. The building of the windmill, with various other improvements, was expected to take 2 years. And I'm going to stop it there and do part 3, which is very less, so we'll do a short part, okay? So like and subscribe so we can get to 1,000 subscribers so we can start beekeeping and make the world a better place, one person and one moment at a time.